You rehearse your future every night without knowing it. That drowsy window between wakefulness and sleep, where your thoughts blur and your body feels heavy, is when your self-image is most exposed. Most people fill it with worry, replaying arguments, or scrolling worst-case scenarios. And every single morning they wake up wondering why nothing in their life seems to shift. A lecturer named Neville Goddard figured this out in the 1940s. He taught a method so simple it sounds absurd. Choose a specific scene that implies your wish is already fulfilled, and replay that scene in your mind as you drift off. Do it in first person. Feel it as real. Then, fall asleep inside it. He called it the state akin to sleep, and he built an entire philosophy around the idea that this narrow window is where identity gets rewritten. The method sounds like wishful thinking. Fair. But the mechanism underneath it has held up better than you'd expect. When you're on the edge of sleep, your brainwave frequency drops from beta into alpha, and then theta. Theta is the range associated with hypnotic suggestibility, deep relaxation, and the kind of uncritical absorption you experience right before you lose consciousness. During waking hours, your analytical mind filters every thought. It cross-references, doubts, edits. In theta, that filter thins dramatically. Suggestions that would bounce off your conscious mind during the day slip through and reach deeper layers of belief. Goddard's instruction was precise. You pick a short scene, maybe 5 seconds long, that would naturally happen if your desire were already real. A friend shaking your hand in congratulations, the feeling of a specific key in your palm. A doctor saying the words you need to hear. Then you loop it, over and over, feeling the textures, hearing the sounds, sensing the emotional tone of the scene as though you're living inside it. The critical detail, it has to be first person. You see through your own eyes the way you see right now. Third person, watching yourself from outside, produces a different cognitive effect entirely. So why does the perspective matter? Neuroscience research on motor imagery shows that first-person visualization activates overlapping brain regions with actual physical experience. When you vividly imagine shaking someone's hand from your own viewpoint, your motor and sensory areas respond as though the handshake is happening. Third-person imagery activates areas associated with observation. The brain treats the first-person version as closer to memory. And memory is one of the primary building blocks of identity. This is where Goddard's technique gets its teeth. He argued that your self-concept, the collection of assumptions you hold about who you are, what you deserve, what's possible, determines the outer conditions of your life. Change the self-concept, and the conditions reorganize. The technique targets that self-concept at the exact moment it's most vulnerable to revision. Think about what normally happens during that pre-sleep window. You're lying there, half-conscious, and your mind drifts to whatever carries the heaviest emotional charge. Usually that's anxiety, a bill you can't pay, a relationship that's fraying, a project you're behind on. Each time you fall asleep saturated in that emotional state, you're reinforcing a specific identity. The person who can't catch up, who's always behind, who's bracing for the next hit. You wake up, and the first thought that surfaces carries the same flavor. The cycle feeds itself. Goddard's method interrupts that cycle by replacing the default tape. You choose the scene deliberately. You choose the emotion deliberately, and you hold both as you cross the threshold into sleep. The last conscious impression before unconsciousness is the one that marinates in your mind for the next several hours. Sleep researchers have documented something relevant here. The hypnagogic state, that transitional phase Goddard targeted, is when the brain is consolidating the day's experiences and integrating them into long-term memory structures. Emotional content gets priority during consolidation, so a vivid, emotionally charged scene experienced during this phase gets processed with the same weight as a real event. Your subconscious mind, which operates on patterns and impressions, rather than logic, files it as evidence, as something that happened. Repeat this for weeks and the accumulation changes something. Your baseline emotional state starts to shift because the evidence your deeper mind references has changed. You carry yourself differently. Small decisions tilt in new directions. Opportunities you would have dismissed start registering as relevant because they match the identity you've been installing at night. Critics say this is confirmation bias dressed in spiritual language. That's the strongest objection. And it deserves a real answer. Confirmation bias is real. When you expect to see something, you notice it more. But that cuts both ways. If your habitual pre-sleep state is dread, you're confirming that identity every morning too. The bias exists either way. Goddard's technique doesn't create the bias, it redirects it. You're already filtering reality through your self-concept. The question is whether you chose that filter or inherited it by default. There's a subtlety most people miss when they try this. They visualize from a place of wanting. The scene is something they desire, and the emotional tone is longing. Goddard was specific. The feeling has to be fulfillment, the way you'd feel if the thing already happened last week. Longing reinforces the identity of someone who doesn't have the thing. Fulfillment reinforces the identity of someone who does. The difference between those two emotional signatures is the entire technique. Get it wrong, and you're just practicing wanting more efficiently. A practical test. When you loop the scene and it starts to feel boring, like remembering something mundane, you've hit the right frequency. Excitement means it still feels like fantasy. Boredom means your nervous system has started to classify it as familiar, as something that already belongs to you. That's the shift Goddard described. The scene moves from imagination to assumption. One of his most repeated instructions was, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Assume. The word choice matters. An assumption operates beneath conscious attention. You don't walk around constantly affirming that gravity exists. You assume it. It runs in the background, shaping every physical action without requiring your attention. Goddard wanted the wish to reach that same level of automatic background certainty. The pre-sleep technique was his delivery mechanism for getting it there. The compounding works slowly at first. A few nights in, nothing visible changes. A week in, you might notice a subtle difference in your morning emotional baseline. Less dread, more neutrality, maybe a flicker of quiet expectation. The external shifts, when they come, tend to arrive through normal channels. A conversation you wouldn't have initiated. An idea that surfaces while you're doing something unrelated. A decision that feels obvious in the moment, but would have terrified you a month ago. The bridge between the inner shift and the outer result is almost always invisible while you're crossing it. Goddard died in 1972. He left behind hundreds of lectures, most of them recorded in small auditoriums in Los Angeles. His language was biblical, dense, often mystical, which made academics dismiss him and seekers romanticize him. Strip away the mysticism and the core instruction is startlingly mechanical. Control your mental state at the threshold of sleep, and you control the assumptions that generate your waking experience. The part that lingers is how ordinary the method is. No equipment, no substances, no guru required. Just you, lying in bed, doing something you already do every night. Except this time, you choose what plays on the screen behind your closed eyes. The difference between someone who drifts off to random anxious chatter and someone who drifts off inside a carefully chosen scene of fulfillment is, over months, the difference between two completely different people. You've been programming yourself at bedtime your entire life. The only variable is whether you've been doing it on purpose.